Welcome to our annual Veterans Day program. As with all of our community times this year, we are forced to share our guest message with you today via video. But this has also given us the opportunity to connect outside of the Huntsville community and bring to you today Dr. James Bond Stockdale II. Dr. Stockdale is the son of James Stockdale, who is the most decorated officer held as a POW during the Vietnam War after his plane was shot down over North Vietnam shortly after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. For the better part of 7 years, Admiral Stockdale was tortured and held captive in the infamous Hanoi Hilton. During this time, Stockdale was able to pass vital information along to the CIA through letters between he and his wife, Sybil. A Medal of Honor recipient, Admiral Stockdale later served as the president of the Naval War College and president of the Citadel. In 1992, Admiral Stockdale was a candidate for Vice President of the United States as running mate for Ross Perot. A Stoic philosopher in his own right, the Admiral was featured in the best-selling book Good to Great, in which Jim Collins, the author, coined the term the Stockdale Paradox, after gaining insight into the philosophies that helped Stockdale and his fellow soldiers endure captivity. Admiral Stockdale passed away in 2005, but his legacy continues on today through his family and the courses still taught at the Naval Academy and War College that he developed. While his father was away, Dr. Stockdale left his home outside of San Diego, California, and attended boarding school in Mercersburg Academy in Mercersburg, Pennsylvania. After earning both his master's and doctoral degrees from Auburn University, Dr. Stockdale served as a leader in education for over 4 decades as a division head, head of school, and superintendent of both independent and public schools in Georgia, Tampa, Florida, Chicago, New York, and Pennsylvania. While specializing in assisting the turnaround of struggling school districts, he was also a frequent lecturer and still is at the Naval War College and at the United States Naval Academy. He currently lives in Beaver, Pennsylvania with his wife Marina, where they recently restored the 100-year-old barn at their home. The couple have 2 children, Elizabeth, who is also an accomplished independent school leader in her own right, and Bond. We are excited to connect with Dr. Stockdale today and listen to his timely message, including insights of what it was like to be a teenager at your same age facing such a long period of disheartening circumstances with unpredictable and an unknown end in sight. We are excited to connect today with Dr. Stockdale in Pennsylvania and to listen to his timely message, including the insights of what it was like to be a teenager at the same age as many of you, facing such a long period of disheartening circumstances with an unpredictable and unknown end ahead. Please welcome Dr. James Bond Stockdale II. Jim, thank you for joining us this morning and sharing with our students. We're excited to have you, as I mentioned in the introduction. And now I will turn it over to Jim Stockdale.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peden. I appreciate that so much. And thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts. I want to thank everyone for taking this time. Not that it matters much, but I didn't talk about Vietnam for about 40 years. Seriously, the responses to the story were either indifferent or doubtful, doubting, rather. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've discovered that people are more receptive. Maybe we're far enough along or away from the actual experience that the scars no longer lead directly to pain, but the story seems to have found a little bit of a tolerable historical space and maybe some applicability to what we're going through right now. We're always, struggling to find some sort of relevancy for the story, but this does have to do with folks who had to lock down for a little while. I want to say at the outset, there's a big difference between being in quarantine and being in prison. Of course, the main difference being a lock on the door, but it's interesting in these days of what my friends and I call, it used to be the coronavirus, I guess. We call it the Rona, but not that it matters. I host a men's group for my church one evening a week, and these are active guys, pretty sharp. And last week, one of them said, it might be easier for me to conform to the lockdowns and loneliness if I were confined, like against my will. Because I am at liberty and have the basic flexibility to do whatever I want, if I disengage my caring for myself and my family, it just might be easier to be confined. When things get difficult and troublesome, and this isn't a presentation where I necessarily highlight those things, but it's an awareness that I'm not sure is taken into account as well as it might be. Having said that, this is simply one family's story and not an attempt to twist the tragedy or to validate the horrifying story of our involvement in Vietnam. This offering is submitted in a spirit of openness and humility, and I hope without trace of self-centered, arrogant hallucination that sometimes accompanies such stories. So, unlisted ingredients in the telling of the tale are a smidgen of psychic violence. Sometimes my voice may quaver with a little fury as I relive, if even for a few seconds, some of the realizations that, in the end, we're all alone out there, in spite of all the official reassurances. I grew up feeling as though I was in a Navy family as much as my own family for 14 years. And I always thought they'd be there for us. They will, they were in some ways. But I hope I sometimes say the entire presentation is built on a foundation of unresolved grief, but not far away from that, to be truthful, sort of with the warning, failings, and shortcomings understood. My father was a naval aviator. He loved to fly supersonic aircraft and spent his career climbing in rank and responsibility through fighter squadrons. Assigned to various aircraft carriers on both coasts, he and Mom were very dedicated. We were a Navy family. For all of his life, I had a special relationship with my dad, the kind of special you learn to savor when you realize how rare such things are, whether you're 10 years old and throwing a baseball or 50 years old and helping him edit his writing. I was 14 when he was shot down and 22 when he came home. For those first 14 years, Dad and I shared about as much joy as any father and son could. On weekends, occasionally, I'd be in the house working on something in my room, and I'd hear Dad walking through and clapping his hands and saying, "Okay, it's time for Jimmy and I to go do some errands." And we would jump out into Dad's junk car and maybe make it to the hardware store, but we would always wind up on a Navy base, in a hangar or a ready room, going aboard an aircraft carrier or going into ONR, the Jet Overhaul Facility. These may not sound like exciting trips to you, but as a 7-year-old, I actually got to ride out to Moffett Field with Dad in his 49 Plymouth, and as we piled out, we went into what is called the Ready Room, Squadron Ready Room. It's an industrial place with Naugahyde couches. It smells like coffee and cigarettes, and it's where the aviators hang out when they're not flying. A couple of them were in flight suits, about 6 of them this one day, and one said, "Hey, to pass the time, let's go down to the start of the runway apron and watch them do touch and goes." They had just gotten some brand new airplanes from Chance Vaught in Dallas, Love Field. A couple of the aviators had taken them up and were checking them out. In pilot terms, they were going to wring them out a little and test their tolerances. Dad grabbed me by the hand and we got into a couple of Jeeps and went screaming down the concrete runway. Stopped at the end and you could watch. And as the pilots were getting the feel of these planes, out of the horizon would come one of them, and it would, I don't know if you can see this, but it would drift in. And they would do that to simulate the float they needed to cultivate when landing on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. And then they would hit the tarmac and the tires would go bang, and the pilot would drop JP4 jet fuel into the main fuselage mix, and it would go into afterburners, and there would be this boom and zoom out into the horizon. It was just gone up in the sky, and all of the aviators were clapping and yelling, and I was sitting on the hood of the Jeep screaming, "This is exciting," as a kid. And that was one way Dad and I shared our time together. He came to every one of my Little League games, even though I only played the last 2 innings in right field. I was awful, a left-handed dyslexic mess. We took walks in the woods, we sighted deer, we studied nature, and slept under the stars. We laughed a lot because we moved around so much. And this isn't that unusual if you have a good relationship with your father as a military kid. Sooner or later, you discover that you've kind of found your best friend. without classmates. I was the oldest of 4 boys. We lived in 12 different homes on both coasts before arriving in Coronado, California. Had Dad come home on schedule, his next predictable assignment would have been in Washington, D.C. The plan was that I'd be sent to Mercersburg, a boarding school not far from D.C., and the family would catch up with me when those orders came through after Dad came home. Arrangements to attend the academy had already been completed when Dad was shot down in 1965, and our decision as a family, of course, as ever, was to proceed as planned. Never let them see you sweat. Maintain an even strain. These are the mantras of the fighter pilot family. And we would proceed as planned, and when Dad came home, everything would just still be in place, just the way we knew it would be, just fine. It's hard to recall, but early US involvement in the war, 64 and 65, was less controversial than it became later, almost low-key. In military communities, the risks were portrayed as minimal. Officers asserted that this conflict would be over soon. If Mom and I heard one brassy naval analyst, we heard a dozen say, "We'll have this thing mopped up in 6 months." No such luck. So it's between 9:30 and 10 p.m. on a Thursday night, September, and I hear the front doorbell from my basement bedroom. Mom and my younger brothers are up on the second floor, either already or getting ready for bed. They can't hear the bell, so up the stairs I go, not thinking this is that unusual, probably a neighbor returning something or needing to borrow, until I see through the door a Navy chaplain and Mom's best friend. As I open it, Doyen Salzig clips with a little urgency, wondering where Mom is, and pushes me, leaving Navy chaplain and I staring at one another. Advice to Potential Prisoner of War Families, a Department of Defense publication. In the event of capture, PNOK, it's so personalized, it stands for primary next of kin. PNOK will be notified in person if possible. Immediate recommended action by PNOK are that parents of the prisoner and parents-in-law of the prisoner should be notified by telephone. They should be instructed not to release any information to the press and not be interviewed by the press. PNOK should engage someone to act as telephone operator. This person should be instructed to accept no calls from foreign cities. No information of any kind should be released about the prisoner or his family. The standard answer of news or to news agencies should be Mrs. Blank in the document has no comment for the press at this time. Press silence is to be maintained. Anything other than name, rank, serial number, or age can skillfully be used in psychological warfare to coerce the prisoner to aid the communist propaganda program. And I could go on from there. All prisoners to date have signed some paper which they would not be expected to unless a victim of psychological warfare. Any medals awarded to the prisoner in his absence should be accepted by the family of the prisoner when offered, and on and on and on. Suppress, suppress, suppress. Keep quiet. Don't tell people about this. It will only lead to worse problems. And not to overwork this particular problem, but if you're the spouse of an aviator, let's say a lieutenant's wife who's been captured and you're scared out of your wits, this is not suggested or recommended action, as the title infers. This is an order. And the military isn't supposed to give dependents, as the spouse and children of active military are called, aren't supposed to give dependents orders, but every wife or spouse would know right away, do as you're told. Keep your mouth shut, obey the rules. There could be consequences. Okay. We get up the next morning and kind of take a breath, one foot in front of the other. We made it through the first few days fine, kind of in a daze, almost afraid to smile sometimes, but gradually loosening up and realizing that this was our new normal. I came home from football practice the next week and found Mom sitting in the breakfast nook with red eyes. My younger brothers were out playing, and I just sat and hugged her and asked what was wrong. And she started to cry, saying, "Oh God, Jimmy, I've blown it. I've really blown it." And she shares that for the past 2 weeks, she has been wondering if we would receive Dad's pay. She's made 3 calls on different days to the payroll office at North Island, the closest Navy base, asking or wanting confirmation that she would receive Dad's check in a kind of a routine way. The commander in charge of the office had just called and said with a drawl, "Well, Mrs. Stockdale, thank you. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding, but as you may know, the central pay facility is in Cleveland. That's in the Eastern time zone. So when we get to work here in our office at 8:30, they're pushing lunch in Cleveland and the lines are just jammed. We try to get through all day, but we just haven't had any luck. So we'll keep trying and I'll let you know." Well, he lit Mom's fuse in a little bit with a little bit of that, and we didn't call it that then, but mansplaining just hit her trigger just right. And she said, "Commander, there is a misunderstanding. It's between you and your duties as a naval officer. I know my husband, a naval officer, would handle the problem differently. He knows, as you do, that Cleveland is in the Eastern time zone. So he would get out of bed at 5 o'clock and he would go into the office at 5:30. He'd dial Cleveland, and what do you know? Johnny on the spot. I'll bet he might be the first call they picked up that morning, and he would have an answer. And let me tell you, Commander, that my husband would do that for me or any other Navy wife willingly, but he's presently a little indisposed. So I'll appreciate an answer if you can find one, and if not, I may have to call the captain of the base." Well, that's quite a lot. But the commander called 2 hours later and said that we would receive Dad pay, which was a great relief to Mom. But there was a question about whether or not he would qualify for combat pay. So we would just have to wait and see on that. She'd made 3 calls on the different days and finally got through. God bless the guy who called her back, and bless him more for finding out we'd in fact be able to, that Mom would be able to pay the mortgage a week later. Strange things happen to you in a household when something like this happens. We'd sit at dinner quietly, usually, and Mom would say something like, "I've decided to buy not to buy any new clothes until your father comes home." Okay, not quite sure how to go with that, but 4 or 5 days later, I've decided we're not going to take any pictures until Dad comes home. And the 4 of us aren't going to argue. I'm looking at my brothers and getting them to sort of nod knowingly. A couple of weeks later, we started to have a little bit of rice in a bowl with each of our evening meals to try and think about where Dad was, what he may be or maybe not eating. And after you settle through those first difficult adjustments, after you've finished with that, the USS Oriskany arrives in home port about 10 blocks from our house. Now, an aircraft carrier's arrival back in a Navy town after an 8-month cruise is a celebration. Bands play, streamers are shot into the air, and families embrace. If he had come home on the ship by 6 that evening, Dad would have been smoking his pipe mixture number 79, enjoying a whiskey sour, and playing the piano in our living room. But we had no reason to go to the pier when the Oriskany arrived in port that November day. The next day, Dad's sea trunks were unceremoniously dumped on the berm of our front lawn, between the sidewalk and the street. I saw them as I came around the corner on my skateboard from school and just closed my eyes. Mom and I carried them upstairs to Dad's closet without a word. The metal boxes, the sea trunks, remained unopened until it was time to pack my things for the start of boarding school in Pennsylvania. Dad had sweaters and shirts that would fit me, and we needed to make things economical. What clothes we did not buy at the Presbyterian Church's Not New shop, we cobbled together from clothes tailored by Lee Chong Tai, 49 Johnston Road in Hong Kong. Dad and almost every other naval officer bought his civilian clothes in Hong Kong because the quality was high and the price was right. One version of the Navy uniform, though, came in very handy because it called for a black tie and black socks. This is a way that people at the boarding school would know I was a new boy. Mom and I moved items from one trunk to the other on top of what was already packed for school: a study lamp, the old Zenith clock radio Dad had given me the year before. I was invited to come to the school for early football practice, and I discovered that's a little bit of a euphemism because anyone could come back for football practice. We were just not that good. We were told we were invited, and we would all stay in a separate special dorm until the rest of the student body arrived. One day, after practice in the afternoon, I went looking and found my permanently assigned room in the main hall. The trunk we had sent ahead had arrived, and I opened it all alone in the quiet of the big dorm on the first floor. As the late afternoon sun streamed in the windows, I flipped the latches, tossed the lid back, and the big box exhaled, and out wafted the sweet, penetrating smell of Dad's pipe tobacco. I knew his familiar cable sweater would be rich with scent, so I held it close, and tears welled up in my eyes, eventually cascading, but I would not succumb to sobbing. I filled the old wooden bureau drawers and hung my suit and two sport coats in the closet and went down into the hallway to try to find the bathroom to rinse my eyes. This was my first time in Main Hall, and I didn't realize the first floor of Main had no bathroom. And right away, my mind started to race, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm a new boy. This is part of the hazing. They put me on a floor with no bathroom. And of course, the bathroom was downstairs. I eventually found it in the basement, splashed water on my face, and headed over for dinner. The boarding school brochure said there's no place you can feel more a part of things than Mercersburg. Well, there's no place you can feel more alone. Say what you will, there were vestiges of old school, almost medieval assumptions working at Mercersburg in the late 60s, even though the world was changing at a voracious pace all around us. Some of those old school expectations included that boys should learn or be taught, I'm sure with the best of intentions, to mutate emotional pain into raw anger and then find a way to fight it out inside yourself without betraying struggle or discomfort. And some of that fostered with profound concision the first stirrings of identity almost at war with itself. Now, these are subtle and seditious tendencies for teenage boys that seem a permanent part of growing up in America, leading many to a lifetime of unfortunate embrace of indignation or steady, subtle, lifelong drumbeats of sublimated anger. My grades were kind of crappy at the new school, and it wasn't a happy experience, but I was going with the family flow and trying to be cooperative. Mom was wondering why I didn't, you'll like this, apply myself more. And I just told her, that there's no one helping me with anything out there. It's just sink or swim, and that sink or swim, sometimes with a sneer. No one is looking over my shoulder or seeing me struggle with the intention to help me out. We're getting you ready for more difficult challenges, was the school line. Yeah, well, thanks. And just so you know, Mom, if you want to be mocked or derided or made to feel small, there's no easier target than the kid who appears to be struggling, a kid they label as nothing but a try hard. And this against the backdrop of never let them see you sweat. I'm going to share some pictures of family life with you because it sort of makes it easier to envision. I always start and finish here. This was Dad arriving in Miramar, February of '73. Um, I see this picture every day. It still has an effect, as you can tell. But there are my younger brothers under my arms, and Dad. His original greeting to me was, "Gosh, I can't believe you're taller than I am," and that lasted a little while, but we made it through and forged a friendship that would last the rest of his life, of course. This is my brother. This is a picture of my younger brothers and I at about this time. Taylor might have been, we all might have been a little bit younger. I'm in the upper left. Next to me standing is Sid, my brother, and under my arm is Stanford, and in front of Sid is Taylor. This is a picture of Dad before he left on the long cruise. He's at the family desk doing some writing before he gets going. Here's a picture of Dad as the cruise got started. And I'm not being boastful with this picture, but that is on the left is Bart Connolly, the captain of the ship. And on the right is Dad, a squadron commander. There are 7 or 8 squadrons aboard a ship. And he's getting an air medal or a DFC. I'm not quite sure which. The reason I include this picture is because this is the captain's in-port cabin that sounds sounds luxurious. It's probably the size of a large closet in your home. Um, the picture of the ship in the background appears in this next picture, and it's got glare on it. But 6 months later, the same room becomes home to the presentation of a medal after Dad's been shot down. Again, Captain Connolly on the right, Mom putting on her game face, and the four of us standing there. And well, words with her. We got mail about 9 months after Dad was shot down, and we were very blessed to receive mail. Not all prisoner families did. You'd be leafing through your mailbox and you'd come across an envelope like this, which of course took your breath away. This is what the mail looked like originally. Later, because the prisoners were involved in all sorts of cryptographic secret communications in the mail, they went from long pages of written text to a form with 7 lines on it. So you could only say enough to reassure a loved one that you were there and alive. Some of the wives and some of the prisoners got clever and put lines in between each of the 7, so they had 13 or 14 lines. Here in the midst where it says addressee, you'll see that they make Dad write the names of the people who are legitimate, in their view, correspondents of prisoners. Father, mother, wife, brother, sister, son, and daughter, and then made Dad cross off the ones to whom he was not writing the letter. This came into play because these are the people that can correspond, and the fellow who ran naval intelligence asked Mom to choose one to know that this was happening, and that's sort of how I got involved at a young age. This is a picture of Dad taken in a file. This was on file in Hanoi for about 30 years before one of the fellows over there working with the US government sent it to me. We're going to take a look at a film right now. This is a piece of film that does a better job of explaining the secrecy of communication and about anything else. I can talk it to death, but this will give you a sense. This is a film, this is a simulation that we made for a film about the Hanoi Hilton. The main character is Dad. Unusually, the person playing Dad looks quite like him. It's a little disconcerting to those who actually knew our family. Enough said.
In December 1966, 15 months after being shot down, Jim Stockdale receives his first letter from home.
We have a letter from your wife and a picture of your mother.
They had opened the mail already and said, "We have for you a letter from your wife and a picture of your mother." And in front of everyone in the room, Dad looked at the picture and blurted out,
"This isn't my mother."
But the confused state prevented anyone from understanding what he was saying, and he was sent back to his cell.
But who is the woman in the photo?
Grandmother Stockdale would never, as the letter suggested, never impulsively fly from her home in Illinois to Coronado, California. And frankly, she was very afraid of seawater and would never wade in the Pacific Ocean.
But for 3 days, he is unable to solve the riddle. What does it mean?
The letter was drafted and designed to try to tell Dad to soak the picture. The operant line was, "I am very lovely when wet." He finally remembered that urine was a good reagent, and he decided to soak the picture in his toilet bucket. After having done so, and again not seeing a message, he tossed it on the concrete and noticed that one of the corners was starting to separate and the picture was starting to come apart. Of course, this was the intention because as he separated the photograph, he was able to read messages and understand what the real intended message was. The message described how the letter that accompanied the photograph was written on special paper.
In his classified intelligence debrief, recorded the week after his return, Jim Stockdale recalls his first message from the CIA.
The note told me the letter was actually written on invisible carbon paper. All future letters bearing an odd date would be on invisible carbon paper. It gave me instructions to write my invisible messages perpendicular to the lines on my letters home. It said to begin coded letters with "darling" and end with "you're adoring husband. It warned me to be careful, that if caught, it could lead to espionage charges. And it said to soak any picture with a rose on it, and ended with, hang on.
With the arrival of the carbon paper, he felt like he could, in fact, influence policy and get messages back to the United States in some form. And he realized that he had transitioned from an aviator in a foreign country to a spy.
For the first time since he was shot down, Stockdale's life has purpose. The note from U.S. intelligence wants the names of American pilots held inside Wallow. Not an easy request. He remains in isolation, and the North Vietnamese don't take roll call. But the prisoners are communicating from cell to cell via tap code. The method, passed from one POW to the next, is designed to allow communication between prisoners held in solitary confinement. The POWs break the alphabet into a grid, 5 across, 5 down. By tapping the row and then the column, the POWs transmit complete sentences. They are fighting back, even if it's just within their cell block.
We could get a question and answer through 69 walls in 24 hours, very sophisticated. It sounds like about 30 secretaries typing away on typewriters. I tapped with guys through the wall that I never saw for 3 years. I knew everything about him, but I never saw his face.
Every night, Red McDaniel taps a G, followed by B, and then a U. God bless you. The tap code facilitates Stockdale's new role as an intelligence officer, pulling his troops together. To compile a complete list, Stockdale also needs a method to link the various cell blocks beyond the reach of tap code. J.J. Cannell is a Navy pilot shot down in July 1966, and for over 2 years, the Vietnamese are convinced he's completely crazy.
He's not that good.
He isn't.
We'll see one is better. I'm telling you.
He pretended to be crazy, and because of that, the enemy had isolated him in a place called the Carriage House, which was next to the coal bin where the coal was. But isolated from the rest of the camp, except daily the other prisoners would go up to the coal bin to have cooking material, and while they did that, they would communicate with JJ.
JJ becomes the communications link between the cell blocks. Stockdale slowly pulls together a list that reaches far beyond anything known in Washington. Names of pilots whose family have already been told their loved one is dead. J.J. Cannell is forced to endure repeated electric shock treatments to restore sanity he never lost. He eventually dies in captivity. The guards suspect Stockdale is responsible for the internal communication and take him out for a special session with the man the POWs simply call Rabbit.
He was given to spontaneous slugging. I remember him particularly for the fact that he was the man that fed me my evening meal, applied the handcuffs daily, and I could depend on him to squeeze them down to where there was bone pressure, and I knew that by morning my wrists would be throbbing. At that time I was living solo and blindfolded, cuffed, except for meals.
Stockdale describes the harsh treatment in his next coded letter home. The CIA's Photo Analysis Center extracts the invisible carbon message and passes it along to Commander Robert Burrows at Naval Intelligence, who in turn gives the decoded material to Sybil.
And Mom read the secret message that said hand and leg irons 14 to 16 hours a day, masters at torture. A first real encounter with what Dad was experiencing, and tough for Mom to take and tough for Mom to share.
It is now 1967, and the air war over North Vietnam is expanding, and so is the number of captured Americans brought to Hanoi to be interrogated. In October, the son of a 4-star admiral arrives at Wallow. Navy Lieutenant Commander John McCain is a prized catch to be exploited. The pilots are told they can expect no favors from those they choose to bomb.
And fair enough that the men would have to live in difficult conditions after having been shot down while exercising military operations, as they say euphemistically, over their country. This is a letter that this is a scrap letter that Mom was writing to get code through to Dad. And it's many of the codes kept unfolding over time. And in this case, I simply have it here to illustrate for you how difficult it was for her. She says, "Dear, my very dearest Jim, I sent my last letter to you with Mr. William Lederer, who left for Hanoi in late," in the upper right-hand column, late, and then we go over to the next line, April. How I hope and sincerely pray that you, and I'll stop there, and you'll see a number next to the words in the right-hand column. Each of those numbers transforms to a letter that forms a word that sends a message. I won't get into the details, but you can see toward the bottom how difficult that got. You had to organize your thoughts so that every third word started with a letter representing a number that would come through in the code. When I would come home from boarding school or college, I would take pictures with Mom in front of roses that they kept on hand in the Office of Naval Intelligence in case they ever needed to send another picture that would need to be soaked. So that was a part of my gig. Mom would go down and get seconds of roses from the florist, and we'd take pictures. This is a letter from Dad, and it has this kind of funky ink on it, and I didn't know where that had come from. I had read it when it was plain, if you will, without the ink. But later, it arrived back at the house in this condition. And during the filming, I asked the fellow from the CIA, I said, "I don't know what that stuff is." He said, "Oh, that's our stuff. We were trying to see if your dad had sent a message on that paper, and so we soaked it with that dye." That's not the main reason the picture's up here. But if we go 2/3 of the way down without any code or encryption at all, 2/3 of the way down, you'll see a sentence that starts on the right-hand side. It says, "One thinks of Vietnam as a tropical country, but in January, the rains came and there was cold and darkness, even at noon." Well, you don't need to encrypt that. Mom and I both turned to Dad's bookshelf and found Darkness at Noon by Arthur Kessler, which describes the difficult and terrible treatment many of the Bolsheviks received during the day in which the book was written. Had we known, we could have read it more thoroughly to understand. There is even tap code in the description on page 24. There it is. The Rubashov, the protagonist, is listening to the tap code. Sometimes we'd get something just awful from Washington. And Christmas of 1967, I'd come home from boarding school. We were going from the house out to the car to go get something, a little bit of a hurry. On the way out, the mail was in the box. So Mom said, "Grab the mail." And I jumped in the front seat with her and started to go through it. And I said, here's this and that. And here's something from BUPERS, which is Navy family talk for the Bureau of Personnel. And this says, basically, a couple of years after Dad's been in prison, "Dear Captain, you've been selected for Deep Draft Command. Please accept my most sincere congratulations on this achievement." Well, this is a letter informing Dad that he's going to become the captain of a ship as a preliminary to being an aircraft carrier captain. And they've sent it to our home address. "We will be attempting to place you in command at an early date," it says. Well, good luck. At any rate, when I got in the car and I opened this, I just said to Mom, "Just pull over, Mom. Just pull over." We just had to breathe a little bit. Sometimes it was hard to think that they didn't have a list of the guys they might not be sending these letters to. Here's information that Mom would get every once in a while. Bob Burrows, who was in charge of naval intelligence, would send someone to a different location in Washington to give Mom a message. He didn't want her getting or responding to messages that might be difficult right in the Pentagon. Mom was approached by a Navy captain who said, "Mrs. Stockdale, I have information for you." And she just froze whenever this happened, wherever she was, and got a pen and wrote down what the information was, because she needed to kind of steady herself and document it. But the captain approached and read, "Info from classified sources has revealed that Captain JBS USN is crippled as a result of injuries to his leg and possibly both legs. Information also indicated the North Vietnamese will not provide necessary medical care for either leg. Intelligence info from classified sources also indicates that JBS has been kept in solitary confinement for a long period of time, possibly as long as 4 years." Both of those things are correct. A mom was left to walk out of the State Department with this note stuffed in her bag, and about 20 minutes later, she called me from a payphone in tears. This was Mom's job. These are some of the women she worked with. She became a spokesperson, and in fact founded the National League of Families of Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia. That's quite a title. But as such, she represented the concerns of the families for men who were missing and imprisoned. These are wonderful women, and not a very glamorous job. But every once in a while, Mom would also kind of break the rules and cultivate a little press. I think this appeared in Parade magazine at one point, still not officially sanctioned, but Mom and Bob Burroughs had encouraged her. Mom knew that we needed to get the message out so the American people could at least know men were there. This is a picture taken by the press. You can tell by the subheader down below where it's described. This is our house in California, and this is Mom picking up the doormat before moving to Washington, D.C. in 1970. And from 1970 to 71, Mom moved to Washington with every intention of being closer to people to help Dad. Without attribution, the year became a year of terrible bedridden depression for Mom. And it was very difficult, but she persevered and survived that year, and finally figured that she was better off back at home in Coronado, and made that move the following summer. This is a picture, the only picture that Dad really allowed the North Vietnamese to take in prison. This is very late. It's about, they don't know this, but they're going to be released in a couple of weeks. And Dad is over on the left. The fellow with his arm around his shoulder is Robbie Reisner, who was the what many attribute as the spiritual leader of the prisoners, and Dad was strategy and well, military leadership. You can tell it's close to getting they're close to being let go, because on the right hand side under cell number 8, at the very bottom there, you're going to see a little puppy with his head out. Ed Davis had befriended and taken in a little puppy that was wandering the courtyard. His name was Mako. 2 weeks later, Mako would fly out of there in Ed's kit bag. And he came back, and he lived several years here in the good old USA. Coming home, Dad had difficulty navigating inclined planes because his leg was stiff, and it was hard for him to move. That fellow there on the left is his official debriefer, who I later came to know, and was a wonderful guy, but he was not a naval officer. He worked for the intelligence agencies. The rest of these speak for themselves as we move toward being together, and as promised, we finish where we started here, with the opportunity that was unavailable to about 58,000 American families and millions of families in Indochina. We know how blessed and lucky we are. And finally, this is in the hospital room, and this picture is more to describe how we were feeling at the time than any other. I'm next to Dad reading some card. he and mom are there with my brother Stan. I don't know. That just finally the relief kind of comes through. Thanks for letting me share some of those pictures and some of those times. The way that this comes together, and Mr. Peden's been very thoughtful about allowing me to share these experiences and some of these pictures from our life. This was a time of uncertainty for me and my family. We had a responsibility to behave in certain ways that enabled Dad to come home. Right now, you and your community are experiencing uncertainty. We're not allowed to do the things we want to do at all, impulsively, even with planning. We're kept away from loved ones. We're segmented and told we have to behave in certain ways in order to avoid the spread of the virus. These are similar experiences, and while they're different, I would invite you and your friends to talk about some of these difficulties that you're experiencing without complaint. I'm going to say that again, without complaint. It's, get used to it. Life is not fair. Sometimes these things come into your path, and you need to play your part to see that they're resolved for the betterment of everyone or for your family. I simply would suggest that you think about these things as you go through your day and try to address things without complaint and play your role well. You get well, you stay healthy. And if you have younger brothers and sisters or grandparents, you know it's important that you don't behave recklessly at a time when you might infect those you love. Whatever parallels you may draw, I'll let the school, Mr. Peden, and your faculty members guide you. But I'd be willing to take some questions at this point, and Mr. Peden's indicated an inclination to ask them. So thanks for your time, and thanks for your attention to this presentation.
Thank you, Jim, obviously for sharing with us today. And it truly is, I think, a remarkable experience for our students to be able to hear your story and that advice really from a standpoint, as you said, at their age. One question that does speak to in my mind is we have shared previously with our faculty and our students that Jim Collins coined a term in his book, Good to Great, the Stockdale Paradox, that refers to your father's ability to confront those brutal facts of his situation, including those excruciating tortures and moments. And as your father said, that the worst were taking the ropes, while at the same time maintaining that faith in prevailing in the end, that there was still that hope in the face and in spite of those brutal facts. Clearly, this paradox is tied deeply to the philosophy of Stoicism that your father spent so much time studying in his time at Stanford and beyond, in the U.S. Naval War College. Stoicism oftentimes, as we've talked, can be misunderstood as the tamping down or eliminating just feelings that you may have, that misunderstanding there. And one of the things that I really appreciate and truly appreciate as you share with us has been that vulnerability and allowing us all to see that we can lean into these profound, true, deep feelings while still living out this paradox. One thing that Mr. Collins shares in his book is the answer your father gave him in regards when he asked, what separated the POWs who survived and those who didn't make it out. And your father said it was the optimist who died, which seems strange at first glance. And he mentioned that they died of a broken heart because of the roller coaster of emotions and this disappointment when they thought they would get out by a certain time, by a holiday, or and that didn't happen. And then in the spring, and that didn't happen. And then whatever that next arbitrary milepost was. And with this, I also think about what you shared, that you did not share or talk about these experiences for a long time, obviously in working through those emotions, which is so understandable. If you mind sharing with our students and our faculty here, how is sharing this story and truly being open about having these emotions, which has left a mark on me as I listen, How has that helped you just work through the grief and everything associated with this experience?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very thoughtful question, David. Well, let me. I don't think Stoicism means to deny your emotions. I think, I had a line at one point about as I write this stuff. This is a story about a Navy family doing their duty anyway, and that that means absorbing your emotions, realizing what they are, understanding your feelings, and being reaching a point in your maturity as upper school students. You're getting there and you're finding this every day, but finding a way to discipline yourself so that you're not guided entirely, or some would say a slave to your emotions. You've got to take those feelings in, register them, and try to keep going for the sake of your loved ones, for your classmates, for your school. I know that may sound trite, but it's not. You're speaking every day to the greater Huntsville community about what Randolph School is in your behavior. And you simply take these sadnesses that you may feel about being kept apart and work with them and do the best you can within your family. It, it, I have wonderful memories of my grandparents, but one of the things that mom and I had to do while dad was in prison was bury his mother. That sounds sort of, how would you think that would crop up? Well, I mean, grandma, she passed away in Illinois, and mom came out from California, and I had to fly out from Pennsylvania and meet there and bury her. And I remember, I think that was the weekend when I really felt the impact of what my family was going through. But I knew mom needed me there, and I knew she needed me to be a support, not a jabbering, kind of a, hey, okay, we're going to be all right, it's all going to be okay. Not that business, but someone who's just there, not like a rock, but like a responsive, responsible person who's going to help guide things. And not to be too long, but that takes me to the Stockdale Paradox. And Jim Collins, among other things, ladies and gentlemen, is a wonderful, wonderful guy. He's just a very a great. You can tell by his physique. He's gotten a little older, but he was a rock climber, and he used to talk about how being alone climbing a rock was healthy for him physically and psychologically. Anyway, at any rate, Jim talks about the Stockdale Paradox. It comes in two parts. It's a byproduct of dad basically taking Jim by the shoulders at the end of a walk and saying, here's what I learned, that you must never lose faith that you will prevail in the end, while taking into account each day the brutal facts of your existence. Now, brutal facts, it just means real facts. And Jim and I have talked about this, it means the person who can sit there and say, what do we really know right now about our dilemma? What not what you think is happening, not well, here's, or opining about why you think what is happening, not that, just the facts. The facts are, we're here, we're having to stay apart from some of our loved ones and go through some inconveniences as a byproduct of this disease and trying to protect ourselves and our community. But those are the facts. The facts are, it's out there. In biology class, you learn about contagion. We know these things. And after we take stock, you'll find that's the person who's in charge of the room, is the one person who sits and says, what do we really know right now about this? Separate those things we really know from those things we may think or have conjecture about. That person can take charge of the room by simply asking that question. And then after that, Dad's idea was that this would be the defining experience of his life, that he would prevail in the end, and it would become a hallmark for him. So then the question becomes, after you're dealing with the real facts, what does it mean to prevail? Do you intend to, this is more than existence. This is trying to find meaning. This isn't just abiding. This is finding faith in something, taking those facts, believing in the people around you, and doing your best to put things together. And I know these times are inconvenient, but you and I and Mr. Peden know that the way out of our current circumstance is to be disciplined. Don't deny your emotions, but make them a part of the chemistry that leads you to play the role you know you need to play in your family, your community, and your school.
In that answer, I hear you mentioning the duties and responsibilities that you had, and that your father also felt and upheld, that your family, your mother, um, upheld and really had to fight to do so without complaining, which truly could not have been anything less than really just the utmost difficulty, as a teenager, and through that. And we talk a lot about honor here at Randolph. It's a core value of our school. Um, and as you've shared, and as we talk and we see, return with honor is a much respected creed that's associated with your father. It's on the crest of the U.S. Navy battleship that bears his name, the USS Stockdale. Um, as we prepared for today, you made a comment that has really stuck with me. You mentioned that your father and the men who served with him and were there with him, they didn't enter that experience with that phrase, as a tattoo or something, but the phrase came much later, right? That just spoke to who they were. To me, that only serves to emphasize really how this experience did not forge that character, or even, as we've talked about, this Stoic philosophy that guided your father and in turn these men, but it only revealed what really had already been established with their character. And could you speak to of these men who were there with your father, who also served with him, who were clearly following his lead in this moment, but whom already had been shaped to their core by this sentiment and this value that returning with honor, and honor as a whole is a value really in advance of this experience?
Well, David, as you're aware, I mean, I know a lot of these men and work with them. Right now, I'm working with the Naval Academy on what they're calling the Return with Honor project. We sent a film crew out and did very in-depth interviews with about 25 of Dad's fellow prisoners, and I won't. They know this, so there's no reason to paint over it. But one of the motivations was to try to get a very deep understanding of these men before they are no longer with us. So we arrive at this idea that the men who were able to come home, not all of them, were proud because they returned with their honor intact. The leadership Dad provided in this prison was very different. They thought that they were going to abide by the code of conduct, which they did, but had they regimented themselves entirely around that document, it would have hurt them. So Dad had conversations with the prisoners and invited them to converse with one another, and they forged a community. You could tell from Red McDaniel's talk in the film clip, they were corresponding. They were a community, and many of those guys came back. And we talk about post-traumatic stress. A lot of these guys came back and they were diagnosed as post-traumatic growth. But in those cells, your reputation was all you had. And the way you resisted the enemy's ways to torture you and get you to say and write things that you never otherwise would write or say, abiding that and knowing that. At one point, Dad was in a small cell and he was not in solitary, and a guy came back from his initial torture session, and he'd been broken, and he was quiet for 3 hours, and there were other guys peeking. They're in the door space, underneath, and they're whispering. One's looking for the guard, and the fellow said, "I just feel so awful. I don't deserve to be with you." I've been broken. I've done things and said things that I never ever. I mean, these are guys that go from being the king of the sky to the scum of the earth in 3 seconds. And Dad's message to him was, hey, 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 there are no virgins in here. We've all been broken. Now, you need to tell us about your experience so we can all be ready when we go in for our next torture session to know what we're going to try to resist. That's the level of love these guys have. It's very humbling to be around, but return with honor, while it may have these very serious connotations and directions, return with honor can be a part of our everyday lives. Honorable behavior is inside of you. It's not what other people perceive. It's what you and your conscience know about you. And being an honorable person has to do with being honest with yourself, with your loved ones, with your classmates, with your house of worship, with those you interact with. You touch 12, 14, 20 different worlds every day. You touch people in those senses. Do they know you as an honorable person? Do they know you as the guy who might sit in the room and say, let's look at the facts? Do they know you as a person who would then want to prevail in a way that they trust? They know you'll do the right thing. That's what honor is. The thing is, you don't need me to explain this to you. You know this in your heart. So returning with honor, or being part of an honorable community, is having your heart rest easy, knowing that you've conducted yourself with integrity and caring for those around you.
You know, obviously one of the groups that has been most affected has been our senior class in this pandemic. And, you know, in the spring, when we moved to virtual learning, and schools across the country moved to virtual learning, you know, we felt so horrific for last year's seniors, and how the end of that senior year went. But, you know, our hearts and minds have really been shifted to our seniors, who this year enter a year with so many unknowns, as we've discussed, and so many brutal facts surrounding their experience every day. We just had a senior kindergarten buddy convocation that we only had to reschedule about 5 or 6 times, and with each cancellation was again that feeling of, will we ever see this time? But we were able to do it, and that was a great win for us. But it is difficult, especially for our seniors during this time. What are your thoughts or advice specifically for our seniors in dealing with these unknown times at really the same age that you experienced so many of these unknown times?
Yeah, I know this is difficult, and I know that the seniors were looking forward to a year that would be festooned with ceremonies and different praises for them, and having completed the Randolph School curriculum. I don't want to seem in any way insensitive, but you've sort of pointed out a couple of things, David, that make a difference. It's being a strong, courageous, thoughtful, sensitive classmate. It's leaving this stage of life, this high school part of life, with people recognizing and knowing you to be a person of honor. That's what matters. I realize there are lots of photographs that aren't going to be in that album, but folks, growing up and doing well in this world doesn't have anything to do with the party. The party's the thing we think about, the graduation, the ceremony, the deal. But when you get right down to it, those are simply expressions of what is behind those pictures, behind those black and white pictures. are the colors of who you really are and what your friends will carry away. Your reputation is in their hands, and you have helped them forge it by being a thoughtful classmate. It's interesting, David, you mentioned the kindergarten buddy, and that's great, but that's not a ceremony about you, is it? In a fraction of a way, maybe. In a way, it's about you being kind, caring, and thoughtful enough to do that for that younger child. That's okay. That's fine. Pay attention to doing nice things for those who are more helpless than you. Um, but I would say this is a test somewhat of maturity, of your ability to take things in and realizing how you can share parts of yourself and your strengths and your thoughts with maturity. Realizing you're part of a community that cannot act on impulse, that can't rush into different things. We know we have to put the mask on. We know we have to keep the distance. We know that in order to beat this plague, we're going to have to do without some things. I know it's not popular for you to hear. And people of Mr. Pedens and my generation heard it all the time. There are people in the world who have it a lot worse than you. And I just think about growing up without having those 3 meals a day. Think about growing up with brothers and sisters who are abducted or taken somewhere. Think about some of the terrible things that happen in the world that isn't regulated by the love and the caring that your parents and your society give to you. These are things that are given to you so that you can develop strength and become a leader. That's what you need to be, whether you're leading a small family or a state or a country. People want to know deep down, can I trust this person? Can I trust this person with judgments that impact my life? I would simply suggest that we pay attention to what's important. We've talked a little bit about emotions. Those emotions that we need to keep in check are important. They help us become who we are. But it's vital and important that we think of ourselves as custodians of a community of conscience. And if we're a constituency of conscience, we care about others as much as, if not more than ourselves. My thought is you can do more for your personal reputation, for the reputation of your school and your community by being that person who has honor, who people can trust, and in whose hands they want to leave some aspects of their fate. I trust that person to do the right thing.
Thank you. I can't tell you enough, Jim, how grateful I am myself personally for you sharing with us today at Randolph and our students, our faculty, and even addressing parental concerns as we go through these difficult times. And I recognize that while we have talked a lot about a pandemic, and these are not the only uncertainties that we face around us, and we're in the midst of finding out election results. I know today, as you speak to us from Pennsylvania, as we're filming this on a Saturday, your phone is going off and buzzing as things may or may not be being resolved as we speak. And I think this is a timely message today for the various unknowns that we have around us. But it definitely your story, your father's story, continues to speak to us, to a nation, as we reflect on Veterans Day, of all that those who have served and continue to serve and will serve, how much they have done for us as a grateful nation. And so I thank you for sharing today. I thank you for being willing to open up and be honest with us. And I can't thank you enough. So thank you, Jim.
And thank you, David, for having me. It's been my honor.
Thank you.